Hey, hey, hey! Welcome back to Six Wins. This is Chris, and I'm Matt, and we're going to review two matchups in our best WWE Superstar bracket today. These are two great ones. I love all the wrestlers here. We're talking about AJ Styles, who went up against Chris Jericho in one matchup, and then in our other matchup that we're talking about, Eddie Guerrero versus Ric Flair. We're going to reveal who won and who everybody voted on, because since we do throw up all of these polls on our social medias. And if you like seeing these polls and voting on them, follow us on there. They're daily polls. If you like these videos where we talk about the winner, go ahead and subscribe so you can keep seeing them. I see your finger drifting down to that button. You can do it. We won't judge you. We won't tell anyone. It'll be our little secret. All right, but we're going to get right into it with our own thoughts first. Do you have one you want to talk about first?
Yeah, I would love to talk about AJ Jericho first.
Okay, right on.
Because this was up there with, which one? With Kurt Angle, Roman Reigns.
Yeah.
So this is probably the second round matchup in terms of difficulty for me to call. Because I love AJ a lot, but really getting down to brass tacks, which we talk about, I got to go Jericho for my vote. He just had the longevity. He's reinvented himself time and time again, and let's not forget about, hey, Matt, you know what happens? You know what happens when you don't subscribe to Six Wins Media on YouTube? You want to know what happens?
Don't do it.
You want to know?
Don't, no!
You just made the list! So, how do you get a list over like Jericho did? Unbelievable, and in terms of in-ring ability, probably a wash.
Oh, yeah.
If I had to give the nod to someone, maybe go AJ. I feel like AJ is one of them few who can wrestle with a broomstick and make the broomstick look good. But Jericho, in terms of just sheer star power and just ability to reinvent himself, I'm going Jericho.
Yeah, you're right. This is like they are so equal on par on almost all of like the characteristics you would want in your professional wrestling superstar. You're right, like I guess AJ Styles has a bit more agility and can do a bit more high risk things. Maybe Jericho is a bit more holds and technical on things, but like again, that kind of washes out. I think the only way, my own preference, because I've seen Jericho for longer, because I didn't really watch like TNA or the stuff AJ was in before. I knew about him and saw like clips, but I didn't like watch because who did? So I got to see Jericho in WCW, which we're going to try to not count. But I got to see Jericho in WWE, which has been a very long run regardless. And I think the only way I can really separate the two and try and do it objectively beyond just picking my own personal favorite, which would be Jericho for how much I got to see him, is that this is kind of what you've done in WWF, WWE. And AJ has been here for maybe 6 or 7 years now.
Yeah.
And he did come in. If you told me he came in and it was his prime, I'd believe you. He did come in past his prime. Like, I only know it's past his prime because if you watch his matches in like TNA, like the stuff he was pulling off there is incredible. But I would say he's like one notch below his prime in WWE. He's still one of the best wrestlers despite being 10 years older than all the other guys.
Right.
He's amazing. But yeah, Jericho, with so much that he did in the WWE alone, the list, his Y2J characters and things like that, his feuds as a heel, as a face, he's phenomenal. He's, again, one of my own personal favorites. I would then also pick Jericho, as much as it pains me to do it, because AJ Styles is so incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when AJ debuted in the Royal Rumble, one thing I noted is he was such a big deal. He was like the only superstar that they didn't make go through the NXT circuit. Like a lot of the guys who came over from TNA or Ring of Honor or the Indian guys, they still went through NXT and went through it that way, but he right to the main roster, right into some big, some high level feuds. So
yeah, even Samoa Joe went NXT.
Yeah, Samoa Joe, Bobby Roode, Nakamura went through NXT, so all these guys still went through NXT, but AJ, they didn't make him go because he was already such a big deal. But when we put the matchup up to a vote, AJ Styles versus Chris Jericho, who's moving on to the Sweet 16?
Well, I'll let you know right now that the walls were broken down. I know that makes it sound like AJ won maybe, but no, Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho broke the walls down and is moving on to the Sweet 16. So Chris Jericho is going up to face the winner of this matchup. It's our 2 versus 7. This is the Nature Boy.
Woo!
Thank you.
Couldn't do it.
Ric Flair versus Eddie Guerrero.
Guerrero. Really good match.
Yeah.
And we'll keep you on pins and needles and we'll reveal the winner. But this one, we have literally never had a closer matchup in any of our polls.
Not in wrestling, not in actors.
I think, in the minority, just like I think Robin Williams is a little overrated when we talk about best actors. I think Eddie Guerrero's a little overrated.
Oh.
He's great. He just happened to pass away when he was like at his peak. It's very, very sad. And I hate talking about this stuff without sounding like a total heel and a total jerk. But I will say, to his credit, I did think the lie, cheat, steal gimmick, while it was slightly confusing, it's like I'm supposed to root for this guy. Like you brought that up last video. It was entertaining. And I think his... you might have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he won the WWE Championship the pay-per-view before WrestleMania 20. I think he beat Brock, which set up Brock versus Goldberg non-title. Classic matchup. Kidding. And then Eddie went on to WrestleMania 20.
He defended against Angle.
Defended it against Angle, and he retained, right?
Yeah.
So, classic moment at the end of WrestleMania 20 with him and Benoit. WCW guys both being the top champions in WWF.
Yeah.
Super cool. WWE, I think it had been by that time. But anyways, I'm going Flair just because, I mean, the guy's a legend. We did a podcast with Radio Free Wrestling, and we talked about the match Ric Flair versus HBK, the career-ending matchup. And if you're a big fan of wrestling, you know better than anyone that this was Flair's last match ever. He never wrestled for any other promotions. He never did what this was his final match against HBK. And just the classic, I'm sorry, I love you. What a better way to end your career by, looking up at the lights and having, Shawn Michaels go over you. Shawn Michaels, one of the greatest. We'll get to his matchup, in a few days, but I'm going Flair all the way. So what about you, Matt?
Yeah, I won't disagree with you that I also feel Eddie Guerrero is a little overrated because my perception is that people consider him as like a top 10 or like top 25. And I know based on our seating, he would fall in like right around top 25, maybe 28. I think our seating got him pretty good.
I think so too.
I could see him maybe being one higher. I wouldn't move him much higher than like a 6 seed. I think we were pretty objective with Eddie Guerrero here, so I'm happy where he is, and I was happy with how close this matchup was. I couldn't believe it. I also personally think Ric Flair is a little overrated. I think he's so memorable and recognizable and has an incredibly long career. I think the one thing that works for Ric Flair is that like there are some stories he can tell that other guys can't by being around for so long and still being active. There's that story of fighting your own legend, like Shawn Michaels fighting somebody he looked up to, or being like an older guy, wondering if he still got it. I think those are stories that only a guy like Ric Flair can tell, because you can't, as much as you can like manufacture storylines and characters for wrestlers, you can't make up a career for a wrestler and be like, this guy they couldn't bring in like a 60-year-old that's in great shape and be like, this guy was one of the top wrestlers for 30 years and he's wondering if he still has it, but he never wrestled before. You can't make up that storyline. So a lot has to be said for Ric Flair hanging around that long to be able to tell these stories, which are really unique stories that don't happen often. So I appreciate that aspect. I think that's the best thing that he brought to wrestling. I think in his prime he was really good and really solid, but I think there are a lot of guys similar to him. So I would maybe abstain. I like Eddie Guerrero a lot, but I do think he's overrated. So I think I would have to pick objectively here, and I do think Ric Flair, just for total importance to the wrestling and popular culture, would be my vote. But I do like Eddie Guerrero. and I think Flair's been overrated. I don't know. I kind of wanted Eddie to win,
Yeah.
but I would vote for Ric Flair, actually.
Okay, so we teased it that this was the closest matchup we've literally ever had. Hundreds of votes. It was decided by one single vote. I didn't expect it to be so close. I was expecting not a blowout from Flair, but 70-30.
Ooh.
You know, some love for Eddie, but I thought Flair was gonna kind of beat him in a landslide, more or less. So I was surprised. I think Flair got off to a strong lead, at least on Instagram. We do the polls in the Instagram story, and just slowly Eddie was digging in there, and he was going up, and Flair was going down as the day went by.
Yeah. There was one point, I think, before we kind of looked at our final numbers and our final tallies, Eddie Guerrero was ahead by about 3 or 4 before we did our final tally, and I was like, he's gonna do it. Eddie Guerrero's gonna win this. And so we did finally do our final tally.
Yes.
I think there was even a point we did a mid tally and it was tied again. What's gonna happen? It was so close. So who's moving on?
The winner of the second round matchup between Eddie Guerrero and Ric Flair, the man who will move on to face Chris Jericho in the Sweet 16, Ric Flair.
Woo!
By one vote. Unbelievable.